Hello, my beautiful buds. Welcome back to my channel, Sprouts with Joy. My name is Joy, and if you like to talk about plants, you're in the right place. Today we're talking about my favorite plants in the month of October. And because it is spooky season, a number of these plants are on my favorites list because they're kind of spooky, you know, they kind of have those vibes and I'm just in the mood. So obviously I'm naturally gravitating towards those plants. And then some of the other plants I'm talking about are also just plants that have been growing well that I've been noticing. But yeah, I do think a solid percentage of these plants are plants that I'm specifically really enjoying right now because they're the plants in my collection that are unusual or maybe creepy or have dark foliage and stuff like that. Which honestly, I actually don't have very many of those plants. But if you're like me and you don't have very many of those plants, do check out my video on my spooky plant wish list. The first plant I'm going to talk about today is my Gyppersha ornata. This plant is so beautiful and I got it very early on in my houseplant collecting journey. This was one of my first house plants that I got upon moving into this home. And before that, I had kind of a humble collection of like 10 to 15 plants that were mostly succulents, some very basic plants. So I'd say this was kind of my first house plant that was more exotic than a pothos, I guess is a good way to put it. But you know, we've had our highs and lows and our ups and downs, and I've made some videos on that. I think I went into great detail in my Marion TCA collection video if you want to check that out. But the biggest reason that this is part of my favorites this month in particular is that it has been growing so well, and in fact, this is the most recent leaf that it put out a few weeks ago. It just finally hardened off. And you guys, it's massive. It is so big, and I am absolutely loving this plant specifically because of this massive and immaculate leaf. And there have been some other like decently sized leaves and leaves that look pretty nice. Some of the older leaves have crisping, of course. That's just what you can expect with Gyppersha, Calathea, whatever. But as this plant has acclimated to my environment, as I've kind of figured out how to keep up with the watering and we've learned each other, so to speak, all the most recent leaves have been honestly pretty much devoid of crisping. And so we are approaching a new era with this plant, I think. And I'm absolutely in love with it. And this newest leaf, I mean, seriously, I can't talk about it enough. It is literally the size of my head. Like, do you see how big this leaf is? I didn't even really realize that these leaves could get that big. And of course, there's some new growth coming up as well. And I'm kind of halfway expecting the new growth to also be massive leaves like this. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get my hopes up way too much, but can you imagine an entire plant of leaves this big? Like, oh my gosh. The next plant I want to talk about is in my cabinet. And I think at this point, I mean, this plant has somewhat dark foliage, but I wouldn't necessarily classify it as super spooky or creepy. I mean, it's more beautiful than anything. But the next plant I'm going to talk about, I think I could see it as being a little bit more of a spooky vibes plant. And that is my Philodendron varicosum. Oh my goodness, hang on. I do want to give you the chance to look at it. Oh, and look at that newest leaf that's coming in. Look at that. It's so pretty. Okay, I did recently put this plant on a pole and it is kind of growing in a funny way, I think. I mean, it looks pretty nice, but I'm just noticing that over the last few days, some of these leaves have turned to face the grow lights in the cabinet, which is fine. But that's where some of these leaves are like going like whoop, that direction. But anyways, this is actually a plant that I never really expected to own ever, because when I first really started getting into collecting rare plants, the Philodendron varicosum felt somewhat unattainable. I mean, it was not the most expensive plant by any means, but it was still up there. I remember definitely seeing them selling for like $100 up there. And I had heard about a lot of people struggling with the varicosum in terms of getting it to grow nicely and in terms of it having spider mites or being a spider mite magnet. And especially when I was more of a beginner plant parent, I was very intimidated and off-put by that. And so I I just kind of avoided looking at varicosums. But then this guy showed up at my local garden center for $17. Yeah, just like this, like about this size. And I mean, I couldn't say no because just look at it. Oh my gosh. It's everything that I love in a plant. So on the backs of the leaves, they have this red pattern to them. It's not just red backs, which y'all know I'm a big fan of red backs on leaves, but it's in a specific kind of pattern that is really, really cool. And of course, the petioles have some fuzz to them. If you didn't know that about Philodendron verrucosum, can you see that? Because wow, that's really cool as well. Again, I love fuzzy petioles. And then if you look head on, straight on at the leaf, just the shading of the plant, the venation, where it's almost like reverse venation is kind of what it looks like. Instead of the veins being dark, they are like a lighter green, lime green kind of color. And then when you contrast that against the deep darkness of the leaf, and then as the leaves come in, they also have almost like a chartreuse undertone to them. I absolutely love this plant. And it does give spooky. I do think that it does, at least in my opinion. I don't know if any of you guys would agree with me because it's beautiful, but I think it's the dark foliage combined with the fuzzy petioles that could be regarded as somewhat creepy or spidery, and same with the venation. It almost looks spidery to me, but in the most beautiful way possible. I do need to extend this pole because it has already grown beyond the pole. It's a very fast grower, especially it does seem to really love the greenhouse cabinet. So we'll have to see how this plant does over time in my collection because I have only had it for a few months. But so far, I'm really loving how it's growing. I mean, it's soaring to the top of my favorites list in terms of my favorite philodendron of all time. The next plant on my favorites list is also currently in the cabinet, and it's my Alocasia cuprea. Now, I will say that this plant has unfortunately not really grown as well for me as I would have hoped. We definitely have had some setbacks where it wound up with root rot and like almost lost all its leaves. I think it was shocked when it traveled here. I originally got it back in December of last year, and I mean, it had shipping stress and it was cold, and even though there was a heat pack, I mean, I'm sure it just wasn't happy. And so there is a little bit of sadness acquainted with this plant, but thankfully I do think that it's stable. It's not growing like crazy, but it did give me, this is the newest leaf that it has given me, and it was about a month ago, so I do think that it's definitely due for giving me a new leaf at some point. I mean, I don't know when it's gonna happen. It hasn't really shown many signs of growing, but it also is stable. Like, it's not losing leaves either, so that's fine. This plant is not a favorite this month because it has been growing well, because it really has not been growing that well, but every time I look at it, it looks like an alien to me. And it looks really freaky and creepy and bizarre, and that's why I'm loving it this month. There really is no other plant quite like it. I mean, the ribbing and the dark grayish hue, it just looks like undead. It looks alien. It looks very spooky. In my opinion, I think this is actually probably one of the spookiest plants in my collection properly, or like one of the weirdest plants in my collection. And I do know, I mean, this plant has absolutely become far more accessible nowadays. I mean, I'm seeing it at my own local garden center for much cheaper. So maybe it doesn't have the same allure that it used to when I first got this plant or when I first started seeing it around, but it still has a very special place in my heart. So I don't know, let me know if you're kind of tired of seeing Alocasia cuprea, or if you're over it, or if you still really like the plant. Yeah, I think that it went through a pretty massive hype bubble or hype train for a while, but then once it started getting really accessible and cheaper, people were like, oh, well, I don't care about it anymore. Which, again, I actually kind of hate that that happens in the plant community, but it just does, even subconsciously. And I think just the oversaturation of the market makes us tired of seeing things. It's kind of like the trend cycle in terms of fashion. So I don't know if any of you guys are like fashion girlies or fashion guys. I mean,
I do enjoy fashion. I'm not like the most fashionable person ever, but
I'm in tune with trends. I think that they're kind of fun, but I do think that because we're so exposed to trends and it's like they're shoved down our throat, sometimes we just get tired of them, or we cast them aside when we see them everywhere because it's not unique unique and fun and different anymore. And my point is, I think the same thing happens with houseplants, and I do think that the same thing might have happened with the Alocasia cuprea. I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of my impression just based on what I've personally been seeing, because it did have its cultural moment. But now that spooky season's around again, I have been feeling a newfound appreciation, or maybe not newfound, but it's been reinvigorating my appreciation for the plant, because I'm remembering why I liked it in the first place, and I'm getting excited for when maybe it will start growing for me again. Okay, the next plant on my favorites list is kind of another spooky alocasia, and it's my Alocasia Black Velvet. I have had my ups and downs with this plant. Currently, I do think that we're sort of on an upswing. I mean, this plant has gone through periods of growing so well for me, and then periods of a lot of leaves dying back, and it somewhat entering a period of dormancy. But right now, I mean, just look at that leaf right there. It's so big. And then it does have some new growth. So here's a new leaf right here. Here's another new leaf. And then down here, I actually had some Alocasia Black Velvet corms. I grew them and then I potted them all together. So there's some little baby Alocasia Black Velvet corms in here, although at least one of these leaves is looking pretty rough, which I'd say is fairly normal, especially because it went from the super high humidity of my prop boxes to ambient humidity. And sometimes when a leaf goes through that transition, it does not handle it very well. But this one in particular, I've also been loving this spooky season because it reminds me of a bat. It reminds me of vampires. It reminds me, it's a very gothic looking plant. The severity of the leaf shape coupled with how dark and velvety the leaves get. I mean, come on. It's in the name, Alocasia Black Velvet. This was my very first Alocasia. It's also maybe my favorite. My Alocasia cuprea, I think, definitely has potential to be my favorite Alocasia. But since it's never really done well for me, or at least not, it's been stable, but it's never thrived. This one, I have seen it thrive. And even though it has gone through seasons where it wasn't thriving as much, I know what it's capable of, and that excites me. So I think that makes me really happy. And I just love the way that it lays in this basket and the way it looks. Like, this is the Alocasia that ignites my love and appreciation for other Alocasias. And I'm pretty sure I actually only have 3 Alocasia in my collection. The other one is the Alocasia Dragon Skill, which I think arguably also kind of looks spooky because it's so severe looking. That's not my favorites list for today, so I'm not gonna get too into it. But my point is, I do think that a lot of Alocasias kind of have that look. If you're looking for a plant that has Halloween vibes, I feel like a lot of Alocasias are good candidates for that, actually. Even though I don't think I included any of them on my spooky wish list, but it's fine. All right, this plant is my Philodendron micans. Oh my gosh. I recently moved this plant to a new location, and I think that has reinvigorated my love for this plant, because something about rearranging plants in your collection, I mean, it just refreshes the plant, if that makes sense. It draws your eye to it in a different way. It helps you to notice it through a different lens and appreciate the plant again. So I guess that's a hot tip. If you are wondering whether or not you even like your plants anymore, just kind of zhuzh them, move them around, clean their leaves, recognize and learn to appreciate them again. And if you still don't like them after that, great, maybe consider getting rid of that plant. But if you kind of fall in love with the plant again, like I have with this Philodendron micans, then I think it's all worth it. So I also particularly am loving this micans, not only because I moved it, but just look, especially on this side of the plant. Do you see how much it's been growing? Like, please tell me you notice all of these like new growth points that are shooting out. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with the way that looks. This pot is ridiculously full. This vine right here is getting so long. But yeah, I love the fullness of this plant. It is so beautiful. Hang on, let me bring you in even more. And maybe you can even kind of notice how shimmery the leaves are and velvety. And wow, just look at that. The coloration of micans too is stunning. They're dark, but then you've got reddish orange hues in there as well, and pinkish hues. Oh my gosh, I'm deceased. I am deceased. I've actually never really considered Philodendron micans to be a spooky plant before, but now that it's October and now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh girl, you can totally pass as a spooky plant. It has dark gothic vibes. Like I think that it would fit into a plant collection that were curated to be like that. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I mean, it can fit into a variety of plant collections. Obviously, it's a very popular plant and it's honestly one of my favorites as well. I absolutely love it, but I've been just particularly appreciating it this month because of the growth, because I moved it, and also in addition, it looks so good during the Halloween season too, because you're like, wow, like you truly fit into the moment right now. Does that happen to you too, where you don't really see a plant a certain way until it's that given season? Like for me, another one is Norfolk Island Pine. My husband has one in his office, and over the course of the entire year, I see it as just like pine tree, a tree-like plant that's, you know, house. I mean, it's coded in a certain way, but the second December comes around or the holiday season comes around, I see it as Christmas tree and I really lean in and I see it in such a fresh, different way. So I don't know, let me know if you guys have that similar phenomenon with certain plants in your collection, because that's how I'm feeling about the micans right now. Okay, we started this video with a plant that was not necessarily spooky and now we're landing the plane with a plant that is not necessarily spooky, but that has just been growing well and catching my eye a lot, and that is my Hoya carnosa Crimson Queen. Some people also call this Hoya carnosa tricolor, but wow. Just looking at the viewfinder and I'm just admiring this plant so much. She's been growing so well for me recently. I mean, look, there's like a growth point down there and over here, and a lot of these leaves are just so beautiful. Like look, that's like a half moon leaf. Oh my gosh. And then even this one too is really cool looking. And then some of them are like pure white almost. Like, look at that. I love this plant so much and I want to see more and more people appreciate it. Because yes, it is common. It's a classic. My 2-year YouTube anniversary just passed. I think it's my first video on this channel was on September 25th. 2021, which is crazy. I did take a 6-month hiatus at one point that kind of interrupted my flow, I guess.
So it has not been 2 years of making videos straight, more like 1.5 years, broken up a little bit.
But anyway, that's beside the point. Because it was my 2-year anniversary, I went back and I looked at my first ever video, which was a haul. And this plant was in that video. It was, I think, my second Hoya that I ever bought. My first one was a Crimson Princess. And I saw how small it was in that video. And you guys, that I was so shocked, because in my mind, I felt like this was such a slow grower. Hadn't grown that much for me. I just like didn't, I repotted it once, but it just didn't feel like it had done that much. But once I saw that video from 2 years ago and now looking at it now, I'm like, girl, you've come so far. Yes, she's not been the fastest grower ever, but I feel like I haven't like totally noticed her growing. But I think part of it was that I was so distracted by other plants and other new and exciting Hoya that I kind of like forgot about this one. And let me tell you, she deserves all the love in the world, because look at, oh my gosh, there's something that you can't beat about this plant. Like it's just, I love it. Look at that. Oh my gosh, it's such a good plant and I'm very passionate about it, okay? So yeah, this has definitely been one of my absolute favorites. I'm just realizing how much it's grown. I love the way that the plant lays. It's just so perfect. Ah, I love it. I love it. I could just look at it all day. Look at the little speckling too. Oh my goodness. I freaking love this plant. I want to squeeze it. So yeah, this is a friendly PSA reminder to go find your Hoya carnosa Crimson Queen and give it a squeeze for me. Give it a hug. Love it. It is often, I think, an underrated plant because people are like,
Oh yeah, it's just whatever. It's so common. You can find it anywhere.
Whatever. It's not as exciting as other Hoya, but like, come on. Back to the basics, baby. This one is a freaking star, okay? I don't know. Let me know if you agree, if you feel the same way about this Hoya, or if you're just like, Joy, what are you talking about? Those are my favorites for the month of October. As always, please let me know what your favorite plants are this month. I always love hearing about your experiences in the comments. So if you like this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. And yeah, I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye-bye! And happy Halloween!